I was wearing the blue dress my husband had picked out for me 12 years ago. I remember thinking about that while I stood in front of the mirror that morning. He had been gone for 4 years, and I still reached for that dress on the days I needed to feel steady. My son's engagement party was at 7. I had reservations at Bellamy's, the restaurant on the waterfront that he had mentioned twice in passing, the kind of mentioning that was really a request. I had called ahead and arranged everything: the private dining room, the flowers, the cake from the bakery he loved as a child. I wanted it to be perfect. That was my first mistake, I think. Wanting things to be perfect tends to make you blind to everything else. My driver, Otto, had been with me for 11 years. He started working for me when my husband's health began to decline and I needed someone reliable to handle the logistics of our life while I handled everything else. He was 63, quiet in the way that felt like a gift after decades of loud people. He knew when to talk and when not to. He knew my coffee order and my preferred routes and which of my friends I actually looked forward to seeing. He was, in the way that matters most, someone I trusted completely. He arrived at 5:30 to help me load the gift bags into the car. I was upstairs finishing my earrings when I heard his knock at the back door. 3 times, the way he always did. I called down that I'd be a few minutes. And that's when I heard it. Voices in my kitchen. My son and his fiancée had arrived early. I hadn't heard them come in. The front door has a keypad and my son had the code. I assumed he would wait in the sitting room, the way he usually did, but they were in the kitchen, and something in the way their voices sounded, low and close together, the way people talk when they think no one is listening, made me slow down on the stairs. I stood very still on the landing. I told myself I wasn't eavesdropping. I told myself I was just pausing, but I didn't move. The advisor said it's structured as a revocable trust, my son was saying, which means she can change it any time she wants. That's the problem. My hand found the stair rail. Then we need her to change it before she has any reason not to, his fiancée said. Her voice was calm. That's what I remember most. Not upset, not reluctant. Calm and practical. The way someone sounds when they've thought something through. The account in Scottsdale is separate, my son said. She told me that one's already set up for the grandchildren. Which grandchildren? We don't have children yet. Her sister's kids. She set it up years ago. There was a pause. I heard the refrigerator open and close. That needs to change, his fiancée said. I didn't breathe. I know, my son said. I'm working on it. I had paid for my son's education, both his undergraduate degree and his MBA. I had helped him with the down payment on his condo. I had co-signed the loan for his first business venture when no bank would. When that business failed, I didn't ask him to pay me back. I told him it was an investment in him and that some investments don't work out, and that was fine. I had believed that when I said it. I stood on that landing and tried to figure out what to do with my hands. That's a strange thing to focus on, I know. But I remember thinking very clearly that I needed to hold on to something. And there was nothing to hold on to except the railing, and the railing suddenly felt very thin. I heard Otto's knock at the back door again, 3 times. And then I heard my son say, "She's been talking about moving the investments around anyway. I think if I frame it the right way." "Don't frame it," his fiancée said. Just ask directly. You're her son. She'll say yes. I had started moving before I made any decision to move. I went back up the stairs very quietly into the hallway, and I sat down on the small bench outside the linen closet, and I put my face in my hands. Otto knocked a third time. Then I heard the back door open. He had a key, and I heard him call out, "Mrs. Mollett, Hargrove?" I heard my son answer from the kitchen, "She's upstairs." And then I heard Otto's footsteps coming up the back stairs, the ones that go from the kitchen to the second floor. He used those when he was carrying things up, or when he didn't want to go through the front of the house. He found me in the hallway. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the bench. He looked at my face, and he didn't say a word. He just reached back and pulled the door to the back staircase closed, very quietly so it latched. Then he sat down on the hall floor, his back against the wall, and he looked at me. "How much did you hear?" he said finally. I told him. All of it. He was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that I started wondering what he was thinking. Otto had always been harder to read than most people. "The party is in 90 minutes, he said. "I know. What do you want to do?" I didn't have an answer. What I wanted to do and what I could do and what I should do were three entirely different things, and none of them were speaking to each other. "I need to think," I said. "All right," he said. "Think." I appreciated that he didn't try to fill the silence, that he didn't say, "I'm sure there's an explanation," or "maybe you misunderstood." He had heard me say what I heard, and he believed me, and he was waiting for me to figure out what to do next. That was exactly what I needed. The thing people don't tell you about moments like this is how ordinary they feel. You'd think discovering something like this would feel dramatic. It doesn't. It feels like a Tuesday. Like the kind of thing that happens in other people's lives that you read about and think must be so painful, and then somehow it's just quiet. Everything just gets quiet. I sat there and I thought about my son. I thought about the year he was 8 and he had pneumonia, and I slept in the chair next to his bed for 6 nights because I couldn't make myself go back to our room. I thought about his college graduation, how he had been embarrassed when I cried, and how that embarrassment had felt like something small and sweet. I thought about the call I got 4 years ago at 2 a.m. when they told me his father had 20 minutes, and I called my son first before I called anyone else, because I needed to hear his voice before I heard anything else. I had loved him more than he would ever understand. And I had no idea when that love had started being something he figured he could use. I stood up. "I'm going to the party," I said. Otto nodded slowly. "I'm going to be pleasant and present, and I am not going to say a single word tonight." I looked at him. "But tomorrow I'm calling my attorney." Otto looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Would you like me to make sure the recorder on the kitchen system was running this afternoon?" I blinked. I had forgotten about the security system. We had upgraded it the previous spring after someone had broken into the house 2 streets over. Part of the upgrade included audio recording in the common areas, the kitchen, the living room, the entry. My husband had insisted on it years ago for the insurance, and when we upgraded, the feature carried over. I had never thought about it once since the installation. "Was it running?" I asked. "It's always running," Otto said simply. He said it the way he said most things, not to be dramatic, Just as a fact, I put my earring in. Let's go, I said. The party was, on the surface, lovely. The private room at Bellamy's had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the water. The flowers were right. The cake was right. My son's friends filled the room with the kind of noise that makes a space feel alive. His fiancée wore a cream-colored dress and shook hands and laughed at the right moments and was, by any observable measure, the picture of a warm and gracious woman about to become part of a family. I watched her all night. I smiled at the same time she smiled. I laughed when the room laughed. I gave the toast I had prepared, 43 words I had written out by hand the week before, because I never do well speaking off the cuff when it matters. People told me afterward it was lovely. My son hugged me near the end of the night and said, "Thank you, Mom. This was perfect." I hugged him back. I held on for a second longer than usual. I don't know if he noticed. I went home before 10. I told them I was tired, which was true. Otto drove me back in silence, and when we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there a moment before he said, "She's sharp, that one." "She is," I agreed. "Does it make it better?" "No," I said. "It doesn't." I went inside and called my attorney. Not in the morning, that night. His name is Lawrence, and he has been my attorney for 19 years, and he picked up on the second ring because I had specifically told him when I hired him that if I ever called after 9, it was not a pocket dial. He answered and said, "Meredith," just my name. And I said, "I need to restructure the trust." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How soon?" "Monday." "Tell me what happened." I told him. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about Lawrence. He doesn't perform concern. He just receives information and responds to it. When I finished, he said, "The security recording is important. Do you have access to it?" "Otto does." "Good. I'll need a copy." He paused. "Meredith, do you know what you want the new structure to look like?" I had actually thought about this on the drive home. I had stared out the window at the highway lights and turned it over in my mind with surprising clarity, given the circumstances. I told him what I wanted. The revocable trust would become irrevocable. My niece and nephew, my late sister's children, would remain as beneficiaries of the education fund I'd set aside for them, exactly as it was. The rest would be restructured with a professional trustee overseeing distributions, with conditions attached to any disbursement to my son that had nothing to do with who he was married to. My estate attorney would serve as the second trustee. Charitable remainder provisions would go to the children's hospital where my husband had been treated, and Otto. I had not thought about Otto until right then, but I thought about him in that moment very clearly, the way you sometimes have a thought that arrives fully formed. I thought about 11 years of 3 knocks at the back door, and Coffee remembered exactly right, and the way he had just sat down on the hall floor next to me without making it into something bigger than it was. "There's also a bequest I'd like to add," I told Lawrence. I told him the amount. Lawrence was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's generous." "It's right," I said. "There's a difference." He came to my house on Saturday morning. We spent 3 hours going through everything. Otto sent the audio file from the security system, and Lawrence had it reviewed by his paralegal that same afternoon. He called me Sunday evening and confirmed what I already knew. The recording was clear, the conversation was unambiguous, and it would stand up to any challenge. I sat with that information for a week. I did not call my son. I did not change anything in my behavior toward him. I went to his condo for dinner the following Friday, as I usually did. He cooked, which he had always been good at, and we ate and watched part of a basketball game, and I drove home afterward thinking about how love is not the same as being blind. I loved him. I just wasn't going to let that love be a door he could walk through whenever it suited him. A month later, my son called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He asked if he could come by. I said, of course. He arrived with his fiancée, and they sat across from me in the living room, and I brought out iced tea and the good shortbread cookies, and I waited. He started by saying he had been doing a lot of thinking. I nodded. He said he was worried about my financial situation, that he'd been reading about estate planning, and he was concerned that my trust might not be structured in a way that was most beneficial for our family. He used those exact words, most beneficial for our family. I took a sip of my tea. His fiancée said something about how they just wanted to make sure everything was handled in a way that was smart. She smiled when she said it. She had a good smile. I had noticed that from the beginning. When they finished, I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "The trust has already been restructured." His fiancée's smile shifted very slightly. Something in the eyes. "Oh," my son said. "When?" "Last month." "I didn't know you were." "No," I said. "You didn't." He looked at his fiancée. She looked at her hands. "I want to be honest with you," I said, "because I think honesty is something we've been dancing around for a while." I set my glass down. "I heard your conversation in my kitchen, the night of the party. I know what you were planning to ask me, and I know why." The room got very still. My son's face went through several expressions in quick succession. I recognized them all because I was his mother, and I had been watching his face his entire life. First was surprise, then something that looked like it was going to be denial. Then slowly, something else, something quieter. "Mom," he said, "I'm not angry," I told him. Which was mostly true. The anger had moved through me early and settled somewhere I didn't need to carry it anymore. But I am clear. The trust is structured the way I want it structured. It will not be changed based on what's convenient for anyone else. That includes you, and it includes me. It is simply done. His fiancée said. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding about there wasn't," I said. Not harshly, just plainly. She stopped talking. I looked at my son. He was looking at the carpet. "I've spent your whole life trying to give you everything I could," I said. "Your education, your chances, every door I could open. I did that because I love you, not because I expected something back. I want you to understand that." I paused. "But I also want you to understand that I'm not interested in being managed. I've made my own decisions for 64 years, and I'm not planning to stop." My son looked up then. His eyes were wet. I hadn't expected that. "I know," he said. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry." He said it very quietly, not the way people say it when they're trying to get out of something, the way people say it when they mean it, and they know that meaning it doesn't actually fix anything. I reached over and put my hand over his. We sat like that for a minute. His fiancée excused herself to use the restroom. When she came back, the conversation had shifted, the way conversations do when something large has passed through them and left a different air. We talked about other things. She was more careful. He was more present. Nothing was resolved, exactly, but something was acknowledged. They left around 5. I stood on the front porch and watched Otto's car. He had parked down the block for the afternoon, in case I needed him. And I thought about how life at 64 looks. Nothing like what I imagined when I was 30. I thought it would be simpler by now. I thought I would have figured more things out, but I was still here, still deciding things, still holding on to what mattered. That felt like enough. Over the following months, things between my son and me were careful in the way that things are when there's been a fracture that's been acknowledged but not entirely healed. We still had dinner on Fridays. He still called on Sundays. His fiancée was polite, genuinely polite, I think, not performatively. She was a woman who recalibrated quickly, and I could respect that even if I didn't fully trust it yet. His wedding was planned for the following October. I was invited to help choose the venue, which I did. I stayed in my lane and let them have their choices and offered an opinion only when asked. They got married on a Saturday afternoon at a vineyard outside the city. It rained for exactly 20 minutes before the ceremony and then stopped. The light afterward was extraordinary. I cried during the vows. My son saw me from the altar and smiled. I didn't know what that marriage would look like in 10 years. I didn't know if his wife would become someone I could fully trust or someone I would always regard with a small degree of care. I didn't know if my son would become the man I raised him to be, or if that conversation in my kitchen would turn out to be the truest version of him. What I knew was that I was not going to spend my remaining years being afraid of the answer. The restructured trust was signed, notarized, and filed. Otto received his bequest notification the day after the paperwork was finalized. He was quiet when I told him the amount. Then he said, "Mrs. Hargrove, that's not necessary." "I know," I said. He nodded slowly. He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Same time," I said. He knocked 3 times at the back door the next morning, same as always. I had his coffee ready. Some things you hold on to, not because they're perfect, but because they're real, and real is rarer than people think. I've learned to know the difference. I've thought a lot about what I would have done if Otto hadn't come up those back stairs that evening. If I had walked into the kitchen at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on how you look at it, I probably would have smiled. I probably would have pretended I hadn't heard a thing, the way I had smiled through so many uncomfortable moments over the years. Not out of weakness, but because I had always believed that keeping the peace was a form of love. That belief cost me something I didn't know I was paying until that night on the landing. What I understand now, looking back, is that the choices we make or don't make compound over time the same way money does. Every time I stepped back, every loan I didn't ask to be repaid, every boundary I softened because I thought it would bring us closer, those choices added up. Not into resentment, exactly, but into a kind of permission I had given without realizing it, a signal, however unintentional, that my generosity had no floor, that it would simply continue, regardless of what was offered in return. My son is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me, and I think it matters to the truth of what happened. He was a person who had learned, gradually, that certain things were available to him without cost. That is not entirely his fault. Some of it is mine. The best intentions, if they go uncorrected long enough, can teach the wrong lessons just as effectively as cruelty can. What I learned, what I am still learning, honestly, is that integrity is not something you perform on the big occasions. It lives in the small ones. It lives in whether you speak up or stay quiet, whether you hold a line or move it, whether you let love be used as leverage or insist that it remains something cleaner than that. Otto had 11 years of small moments behind him. 11 years of showing up exactly as promised, no more, no less. That is not a small thing. That is actually quite rare. Lawrence, too. 19 years of picking up on the second ring when it mattered. The people who earn trust don't announce it. They just keep showing up. I think the hardest part of what happened, harder than the anger, harder than the grief, was sitting across from my son at that dinner table 2 months later and choosing to remain open. Not naive, not willing to pretend, but open. Because closing off entirely would have been its own kind of defeat, a different way of letting that kitchen conversation take something from me. I restructured the trust not out of punishment, but out of clarity. There is a difference, and knowing the difference is, I think, one of the quiet marks of having actually grown up. Punishment is about the other person. Clarity is about yourself. I was 64 years old, and I finally understood what I was willing to do and not willing to do, and I put it in writing, and I signed it, and I felt something settle in me that had been loose for a long time. My son is still my son. We still have dinner on Fridays. Some things take time to heal, and I have decided to give this one time. Not because I owe it to anyone, but because I choose to. And that distinction, choosing rather than owing, is one I intend to keep for the rest of my life.